2009. A maintenance worker in Pennsylvania named Terry Diebold opened a box from a bankrupt company and found a relic that shouldn't exist. It had the bones of a Super Nintendo, but the face of a PlayStation. This isn't a fan-made mod. It is the physical evidence of the most public corporate execution in history. The day, Nintendo didn't just break a contract. They accidentally built their own executioner. In 1998, Nintendo was the king of the playground. But their games sounded like, well, 8-bit toys. Enter Ken Kutajiri, a rogue engineer at Sony who was so obsessed with gaming, he secretly designed a revolutionary sound chip for the Nintendo behind the boss's back. When Sony found out, they almost fired him on the spot. Sony's president, Norio Oga, saw something in Kutajiri's eyes. He didn't see a toy, he saw a Trojan horse. Sony and Nintendo shook hands on a PlayStation, a CD-ROM beast that would make the SNES immortal. It was the perfect marriage, until Nintendo read the fine print. Nintendo's president, Hiroshi Yamauchi, he was a man who ruled with an iron fist. As he reviewed the Sony contract, he realized he'd been backed into a corner. Sony wouldn't just be making the hardware, they would own the Super Disc format. They would control the licensing and they would be collecting all of the royalties. In Yamauchi's eyes, Sony wasn't a partner anymore. They were a parasite. While Sony engineers were in the lab perfecting the prototype, Yamauchi was in a private jet to Europe, secretly meeting with Sony's arch-rival, Philips. June 1991. The Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago. Sony takes the stage at 9 a.m. They are beaming. They announce the PlayStation to a stunned crowd. The future is here, and it belongs to Sony and Nintendo. Sony went to sleep that night thinking they had won the decade. The next morning, Nintendo took the same stage, in a move that is still studied in business schools as the masterclass in betrayal. Nintendo didn't mention Sony once. Instead, they announced a new deal with Philips. It was a cold, calculated public humiliation. Sony had been ghosted on a world stage. The Sony executives were furious. They wanted to sue Nintendo into the ground and bury the gaming project forever. But Ken Kutajiri stood up in a room full of angry suits and issued a challenge. He didn't ask for a settlement. He asked for revenge. He told the Sony president, "Are we just going to take this? Or are we going to build something that makes them regret the day they met us?" Sony pivoted. They took the PlayStation name, removed the Super Nintendo cartridge slot, and built a 3D powerhouse that made Nintendo's technology look like a relic from the Stone Age. Nintendo stayed with cartridges. Sony, well, they embraced the CD. By the time the smoke cleared, the PlayStation had sold 100 million units. Think about that. Nintendo 64? Not even a third of that. Nintendo had spent a decade trying to stop Sony from controlling their games, only to hand them the keys to the entire industry. And that prototype from the Pennsylvania attic? It sold at auction for over $300,000. High price to pay for a ghost, but a small price for the machine that changed the world. What started as a failed partnership began the war that defined our childhoods. Nintendo didn't just lose a deal, they created a monster. And the scariest part? If you listen closely to the startup sound of a PS1, you can still hear the echo of a bridge being burned. Only time will tell what the future holds, but without this little drama and rivalry back in the 90s, we wouldn't have the gaming industry we have today.